Geralt's white hair was not the work of age. It was the mark left by Kaer Morhen, by the trial of the grasses, and by the further experiments imposed upon him after he survived what had killed or broken so many others. He alone endured those later mutations. They stripped the pigment from his hair, altered his eyes, sharpened his senses, and made his body tolerate poisons that would stop an ordinary man's heart. When he finally took the road, a silver chain hung at his neck, bearing the medallion of the Wolf School, and 2 swords rode across his back. The division between them was never as simple as tavern gossip claimed. Silver was lethal to many creatures born of magic, while other monsters could be killed only by iron forged from a fallen star. The blades did not decide what stood before him. Geralt had to do that. His code had never been written by any guild or master. He had invented it himself and used it because people trusted a man who claimed to obey rules. Yet beneath the useful fiction were principles he tried to keep. He would take coin for destroying a creature that hunted people, but he would not kill merely because something looked strange, spoke an unknown tongue, or frightened peasants. The road had taught him that a human face proved nothing, and neither did fangs. On his first expedition with Dandelion, that distinction carried them to the Valley of Flowers, where the last cultivated fields pressed against the mountains and the borders of the inhabited world. The villagers spoke of pale maidens who visited cottages before dawn, of imps twisting horses' manes, of flying drakes, worthings, and creatures whose names had grown through generations of fear. Most of the tales collapsed when Geralt questioned them. The witnesses had seen shadows, heard noises, or repeated stories inherited from dead grandfathers. There was, however, one real disturbance. Something horned had been stealing grain, breaking dikes, fouling wells, and frightening the young women. The villagers called it a devil. They offered Geralt food and money to drive it away, but insisted that he must not kill it. Geralt accepted, because devils, according to received knowledge, did not exist, and he had never been able to resist examining something that did not exist. The creature had chosen its refuge well. A vast field of hemp gave off an aura that smothered magic, while the pollen from nearby hops weakened spells further. Geralt recognized the calculation behind the hiding place. This was no witless beast crouching wherever instinct had driven it. It understood danger. It understood witches. He entered the hemp without a sword. He had not yet established what he was hunting, and he had no intention of cutting down an unknown creature simply to make his investigation easier. Dandelion followed despite being told not to. Seeds and beans set around the remains of a candle. Then the thing emerged. It stood about half a rod high. Goat horns rose from its head above bulging eyes and a beard. Its mouth worked constantly, soft and busy, like the muzzle of a chewing animal. Dark red hair covered its lower body, down to cloven hooves, and a long tail ended in a restless tassel. When it opened its mouth, it revealed large yellow teeth, more like a horse's than a predator's. It stamped, bleated, and ordered them away. Dandelion mocked it. The creature answered with iron. A ball an inch across struck the poet in the forehead. Another hit Geralt in the shoulder. More followed with unnerving precision, whistling through the hemp as Geralt and Dandelion retreated beneath a bombardment that seemed inexhaustible. The Witcher returned to the village bruised and suspicious. The creature had not chosen those missiles at random. Someone had taught it how local men believed devils should be fought. The villagers finally showed him the source, an ancient book handed down through the generations, filled with remedies for every monster its authors had believed might exist. Its instructions advised offerings, prayers, and iron balls. The villagers could no longer read the runes, but the oldest women preserved the knowledge orally. Geralt understood then that their devil had watched them, learned their methods, and turned those methods back upon them. The book also gave him a name. The creature was a Sylvan, an exceptionally rare and intelligent being. Geralt refused to kill it. He returned to the hemp and tried negotiation. The Sylvan, whose name was Talk, preferred contests. He proposed races he knew Geralt could not win, and riddles with false answers. Geralt endured the game until Talk's mockery had exhausted what little patience he possessed. Then he took one of the recovered iron balls, threw it between the Sylvan's horns, and charged. The struggle that followed had none of the elegance of a sword fight. Talk kicked like an enraged mule, spat with remarkable accuracy, and used his horns whenever Geralt came within reach. They rolled through hemp and hops, tearing down poles and trading blows in the dust. Geralt caught Talk by a horn, threw him, pinned him with his knees, and tried to force submission. Talk escaped, kicked him in the forehead, and fled limping through the field. Geralt pursued him and ran into mounted elves. They stunned him, bound him beside Dandelion, and prepared to kill them because they had discovered what Talk was truly doing. The Sylvan was not stealing for amusement. He was gathering seed, grain, and knowledge of human agriculture for the elves driven into the mountains. They were starving there. They had once lived from a land that gave freely, but the world had changed around them. Plants they knew were failing. Game was disappearing. They had never learned to plow, sow, or domesticate animals, and pride prevented them from trading with the people who had taken the valleys. Geralt had hunted a thief and found a smuggler feeding a dying people. Talk placed himself between the prisoners and the elven bows. He refused to allow their murder, even when Filavandrel ordered him aside. The arrows were lowered only when Lil entered the clearing, no longer appearing as a thin village girl, but as Dana Meathby, the queen of the fields. The elves knelt before her. She spoke without words, and whatever passed between her and Filavandrel ended the execution. Geralt and Dandelion were released. The elves departed for the mountains, and Talk left the valley alive. That night, the Sylvan sat beside the same fire as the Witcher, who had been hired to remove him. Dandelion played the elven lute Toruvil had given him. Talk accompanied him on reed pipes, and Geralt read from the village's ancient book, while the wind moved through the darkness beyond the flames. The hunt had ended without a carcass. That did not make it a failure. Other roads ended differently.
Geralt travelled from towns to fortresses, searching for proclamations nailed to gates and crossroads. He entered ruined sanctuaries, necropolises, caves, forest ravines and abandoned strongholds where the floors were littered with bones. He killed manticores, wyverns, foglers, eshne, iliocoraces, chimeras, leshies, vampires, ghouls, graviers, werewolves, giant scorpions, strigas, black anises, kikimoras, and vipers. Each contract became the same dance in different darkness, the medallion trembling against his chest, the blade leaving its sheath, the instant in which training overcame fear, and afterward, the employer looking at him with the same revulsion once reserved for the creature he had destroyed. Once he entered Blaviken, leading a donkey beneath a blood-stained blanket. When he uncovered the burden, the people recoiled from a spidery body covered in dry black skin. A glassy eye stared from the head, its pupil a vertical slit. Needle-like teeth filled the bloody jaws, and a bony taloned limb protruded from the wrappings. Geralt had killed the Kikimora in the salt marshes near a dike, where people, including children, had disappeared. No proclamation had announced it. No alderman had offered a reward, because no one had known what was taking them. There was no payment. The Kikimora had been real. The missing people had been real. That was not enough to make the work profitable. Geralt had gone where the main road did not go, because a witcher could seldom earn his winter money on safe roads, and he had returned, carrying proof that everyone would rather have left beneath the mud. The carcass was nearly thrown into a cesspit.
The Kikimora brought Geralt no reward, but it brought him to Blaviken. He entered the town, leading a donkey beneath a blood-stained covering. From beneath it protruded the black, jointed limbs of the creature he had killed in the marshes near the dike. People had disappeared there, including children, but no proclamation had been issued, and no one had promised payment. Caldermain, the alderman, examined the carcass and told Geralt there was no bounty. Dead monsters were worth less than living fears. The body would be thrown away.
Geralt might have left Blaviken that same day, but Caldermain knew him from years before and offered food and shelter. More importantly, Blaviken contained a wizard named Stregobor, and Stregobor had barricaded himself inside a tower as though the town around him were already under siege. The inside of the tower did not match its stone exterior. Stregobor had covered it with Elysian, warm air, sunlight, trees heavy with leaves, and a false sky. The vision was perfect enough to deceive ordinary senses. Geralt's medallion trembled continuously. The wizard had grown older since their last meeting. The fear in him was immediate and undiminished. He wanted protection from a woman named Renfri. She had been born a princess of Craden during an eclipse connected by certain sorcerers to what they called the Curse of the Black Sun. Girls born beneath it were believed to carry mutations that made them cruel, violent, and resistant to magic. Stregobor had participated in the hunt for them. Renfri's stepmother had wanted her removed from the succession. Stregobor examined a child, reported physical abnormalities he called proof of mutation, and had her removed under guard, with instructions that she would not return. She escaped.
the accounts of what followed did not agree. Stregobor described an unnatural creature who survived poison, resisted spells, and grew into a remorseless killer. Renfri described a girl abandoned in a forest, assaulted by the man ordered to murder her, forced through hunger and cold, until whatever had been a princess learned to survive as something harder. She lived among outcasts. She killed. She became known as Shrike. Stregobor asked Geralt to kill her.
Geralt refused. The wizard had theories and dead scholars, but could not prove that Renfri had been born a monster. He could prove only that she had survived betrayal and violence and had learned to answer each with the other. Stregobor called her death the lesser evil. Geralt had heard those words before. Kings used them before wars. Priests used them before burnings. Sorcerers used them before experiments performed on people who had no power to refuse. Evil became convenient when divided into measurements. He left the tower before the false sun could set.
Renfri was waiting elsewhere in Blaviken. She was almost as tall as Geralt, slim and strong, with straw-coloured hair and blue-green eyes. A decorated belt held a sword on one side and a ruby-pommelled dagger on the other. She commanded 6 armed men without raising her voice, and they moved with the confidence of men who had survived by killing faster than those placed before them. That night she entered Geralt's room. His medallion warned him. He crossed the darkness without a lamp, seized the intruder, and pinned her to the bed before recognizing her. Renfri did not panic. She produced wine and spoke as though being held beneath a witch's arm were only an inconvenient start to a negotiation. She told him what Stregobor had left out. The man sent to kill her had robbed and assaulted her in the forest. She had survived him and wandered until a group of gnomes took her in and treated her with greater kindness than any human who claimed to be protecting kingdoms from cursed children. In time, Stregobor's hunters found her again. Survival became pursuit. Pursuit became revenge. She admitted killing those who had hunted her. She did not ask absolution. She asked whether Stregobor deserved to live, and proposed that Geralt enter the tower, kill him, and deliver the body to her. Geralt refused again. He would not become Stregobor's assassin, and he would not become hers. He asked her the question buried beneath every story told about her, whether she was truly what the curse of the Black Sun claimed she was. For an instant, the hardness left her face. She did not know. She bled when cut. She suffered pain and hunger and anger. Nothing within her offered proof she had entered the world corrupted. Yet she had killed, and killing had become easier with repetition. Whether that came from an eclipse or from what others had done to her, she could not say. Before dawn, Renfri told him she would abandon her revenge. She would depart Blaviken and take her men with her. Geralt believed her for a few hours.
Morning brought market day. Farmers, merchants, and families crowded into the square. Geralt heard the story of the Tridam Ultimatum, a band of men who had taken hostages and killed them one at a time until a local ruler surrendered. He understood what Renfri had meant by other ways to force Stregobor from his tower. 6 armed men were already positioned among the stalls and families. He took his steel sword and entered the market. He ordered Renfri's men to leave. They answered with contempt and spread around him, using stalls and carts to prevent him from reaching them all at once. Sivril raised a crossbow and fired. Geralt deflected the bolt with his blade.
Then he moved.
He broke their formation before they could surround him, passing between stalls with the speed of a man whose body had been rebuilt for killing. The first attacker fell before the others had properly drawn. The twins came together, their movements almost identical, but Geralt passed between their blades. 15 took steel in the stomach and collapsed across a cart. Norhorn and Sivril attacked from opposite sides. Geralt turned one blade, drove the other man backward, cut Norhorn across the face, and finished Sivril before he could rise. The marketplace fell silent around the bodies. Those watching had not heard the conversation in his room. They had not understood the Tridam plan. They saw only the white-haired witcher standing over human bodies with a bloody sword. Then Renfri entered the square. She had gone to Stregobor before Geralt reached the marketplace. She delivered the threat. The wizard had refused to emerge. He told her she could slaughter Blaviken and every village around it, and he would remain protected behind his magic. The men lay dead for nothing. Geralt told her to leave. She drew her sword.
She wrapped part of her skirt around one arm and attacked behind the fluttering cloth, using it to conceal the movement of her blade. She was fast enough to force him backward and skilled enough to wound him across the chest. Their swords met at close range, while the market remained silent around them. Geralt changed direction, passed beneath her guard, and cut upward. Renfri fell. Blood spread beneath her. Her voice weakened. She said she was cold and asked him to hold her. Geralt remained where he was. When her hand finally opened, a concealed dagger slipped from her fingers.
Stregobor emerged only after the fighting had ended. He wanted Renfri's body taken to his tower for dissection, to search her organs for proof that the curse of the Black Sun had been real. Geralt stood between him and the dead woman. Whatever Renfri had been at birth, she would not become another specimen beneath the wizard's knives. Stregobor withdrew. The people of Blaviken did not thank Geralt. Stones appeared in their hands. Caldermain ordered him to leave and never return. Geralt walked away without payment. Behind him remained the discarded Kikimora, 7 human bodies, a princess whose curse had never been proven, and a town that would remember only the sword moving through the marketplace.
He had refused to kill her for Stregobor. He had refused to kill Stregobor for her. He had tried to stand outside their war until he believed innocent people were about to die. Then he chose. Whether the choice had been the lesser evil, the greater evil, or simply the only thing left available, Blaviken could not answer. It had only given it a name: the Butcher of Blaviken. Another hunt began with birds. Black points circled against a bright sky above the forest, descending and rising over a place hidden beyond the highway. Geralt watched them, judged the distance from the shape of the land, and turned Roach away from the road. It might have been a dead elk. It might not. He found the first body in a clearing beyond a dry ravine. The woman's sheepskin jacket and blue dress remained visible against the sedge, but her face and throat were gone, and much of one thigh had been eaten. A man lay nearby with his back covered in dried blood. Wolves and carrion birds had fed upon him, yet Geralt could see that scavengers had not killed him. the fatal blow had struck his neck.
The man carried an armourer's guild ring and a rain-damaged credit note from a dwarven bank. The woman wore a withered rose pinned to her dress. Its petals were an unnatural dark blue. Geralt turned her body and found bites on the ruined throat. They were not the marks of a wolf. He studied the ground, reconstructed the direction of travel, and considered what he knew. A werewolf or leshy would not have left so much for scavengers. A Kikimora or viper was possible only where there were swamps, and there were none. Whatever had killed the pair had left no clear tracks. Geralt uncovered the second sword, strapped beside Roach's saddlebag, hung dried monkshoot near the mare's bit, and rode into the forest with the wolf medallion exposed against his chest. The trail brought him to a neglected manor enclosed by an overgrown wall. A pale girl watched from the hillside, one hand against an alder trunk. Her dress was white, her hair was disordered and black, her eyes enormous and dark. When Geralt approached, she vanished among the trees with the speed of a deer. Inside the courtyard, blue roses grew beside a dry fountain. Geralt bent over them, and every door and shutter on the manor flew open at once. Something massive rushed him. His right hand moved above his shoulder, while the other pulled the crossbelt. The sword sprang into his palm and stopped with its point levelled at the charging figure. The creature wore the remains of expensive clothing, but above the collar rose an enormous hairy head with great ears, wild eyes, and a mouth crowded by crooked fangs. It roared threats, expecting the stranger to run. Geralt did not move. Beneath the black coat and worn leather jerkin, his body remained balanced and still, the sword ready before him. The creature was Nivellen, master of the manor. Geralt accepted his hospitality and watched him closely. Nivellen could command the house to open doors, kindle fires, and produce food. He could crush bones between his teeth and break furniture with his jaws. Yet he handled a silver tray without pain. He had touched Geralt's silver medallion. Those two facts mattered more than the fangs. Nivellen was not a monster. He was a human being under a curse. Years earlier, after inheriting a band of brigands, he had helped rob a temple of Coram Ag Terra, the lion-headed spider. His men had brought a young priestess to him, and he had forced himself upon her. She called him a monster in human skin, and pronounced that he would become a monster in a monster's skin. Then she killed herself. Days later, he woke transformed. Geralt possessed neither the knowledge nor the power required to break that priestess's curse. Nivellen claimed he no longer wished to be human. His altered body was stronger and healthier than the one he had lost, and over the years merchants had left daughters at the manor in return for gold. None of those women had restored him. Now another woman lived there, though Nivellen tried to conceal her. Her name was Vereena. She was slim, dark-haired, and almost silent. She disappeared into the forest for days and did not eat human food. Nivellen believed her to be a Rusalka. He said they loved one another. Geralt left before nightfall, but the evidence followed him. The murdered woman had worn a blue rose taken from Nivellen's courtyard. Nivellen said animals liked him,
and Roach had accepted his touch. Yet the mare had nearly panicked outside the manor. Later, beside an ordinary circle of reddish mushrooms, she recoiled again, and Geralt understood that her earlier terror had never been caused by Nivellen. He turned back.
Roach refused to enter the courtyard. Geralt left her outside and approached on foot, with the silver sword across his back. A quiet song flowed from the manor grounds. He did not understand its language, yet its nature was unmistakable. The sound entered the blood like poison.
Vereena clung to the stone dolphin in the empty fountain, her tiny hands pale enough to seem translucent. Her black hair hung around a delicate face, and her eyes were the color of coal. Though her lips were closed, Geralt still heard the song. He drew the silver blade. A rusalka might have deceived a man. She could not deceive a horse. Geralt considered a mula, then an alpor. Vereena denied both names without speaking. Her smile widened. The pale lips drew back from long white fangs. Bruxa. Her scream struck like a siege hammer. Geralt crossed his wrists into the sign of Heliotrip before he hit the wall, and the magic spared him the worst of the impact, though darkness rolled across his sight and the air was driven from his lungs. The girl was gone. An enormous black bat crouched upon the fountain, its body glossy, its jaws long and narrow, its teeth arranged like needles. It launched itself without a sound. Geralt cast Quen and forced the creature to turn, but it rose above him and dropped toward the back of his neck. He evaded, cut, and met nothing. The bat folded one wing, circled with impossible control, and attacked again. Geralt stepped forward rather than away, and swung with both hands. The blade passed through empty air. Talons opened his cheek, and a damp wing struck his neck. The Bruxa returned to the fountain and flowed back into the shape of the pale woman. She screamed again. This time the sound broke through the sign. Pain drove into Geralt's ears and skull. His face went numb. False music, voices, and the sound of a storm filled his hearing, while the black shape descended upon him. Training moved him when thought could not. 3 steps, a turn, and a 2-handed cut brought silver against the creature. The Bruxa shrieked and resumed her human form. A small red wound appeared above her breast. The blow should have divided her body. It had only scratched her. Her voice entered his mind without passing through her lips. She promised to kill him. Geralt advanced. Blood ran from his cheek. The silver sword remained between them, its point steady despite the pain in his head. Nivellen staggered from the manor with blood on his sleeve and called Vereena's name. She turned toward him. Geralt leapt, but her scream threw him across the gravel. Nivellen tried to seize her, and another blast hurled his heavy body into wooden scaffolding, burying him beneath collapsing poles. Geralt rose and ran across the courtyard, trying to draw the vampire away. Vereena followed in the white dress, gliding so lightly that her feet scarcely seemed to touch the ground. She was weakening. She remained fast enough to kill him. He feinted with the sword and changed direction. Her next scream caught him before he formed a sign. His spine struck the wall,
Pain flooded his limbs, and he dropped to his knees. Vereena came toward him, with her fangs exposed.
Nivellen tore himself from the wreckage and drove the broken end of a long wooden pole through her chest. The Bruxa did not scream. She sighed.
She hung upon the shaft in her white dress, her hands wrapped around the wood. The point had burst through her back. Nivellen retreated until the other end scraped against the manor wall, yet Vereena began pulling herself along the pole. The wood passed through her body. Blood covered the dress. Her hands moved closer to Nivellen, and her voice sounded inside Geralt's skull, claiming him as hers, declaring that no one else would have him.
She reached Nivellen's head and drew her fangs towards his throat. Geralt moved. Every step belonged to the training hammered into him at Kaer Morhen. His foot struck the ground, his torso turned, and the silver blade crossed the space between them with the certainty of an action performed hundreds of times. The edge passed through Vereena's neck. Her black hair floated for a moment after the head had left the body. Then both fell.
Beside the manor wall, the huge, hairy creature collapsed into the nettles. When he raised his head again, the beast was gone. A pale, handsome, well-built young man stared at his hands, touched his human face, and felt ordinary teeth inside his mouth. 4 bloody marks remained where Vereena had clawed him. The curse had broken.
Nivellen had spent years searching for the fragment of truth hidden inside old tales of beasts transformed by love. The merchant's daughters had changed nothing. Vereena had. Love and blood had possessed the necessary power, but the love had belonged to a vampire, and its proof had been given upon a stake.
Geralt helped Nivellen stand. Both of them required the medicine carried in Roach's saddlebacks. They crossed the courtyard supporting one another, passing the blue roses, while the Bruxa's body remained behind them. The road did not always bring him to a creature that could be named from tracks, wounds, and old knowledge. Once it brought him to a chipped amphora, caught while he and Dandelion were fishing for breakfast. A brass seal closed the vessel, marked with a broken cross and a 9-pointed star. Geralt warned the poet not to touch it. Dandelion believed a genie lay inside and refused to surrender the promise of 3 wishes. The amphora fell during their struggle. Red light smoked from its mouth. The vapor gathered above the river and formed a distorted head 6 feet across. It had enormous eyes, no proper nose, and a mouth that shifted continuously between a beak and drooping, deformed lips. Dandelion began announcing his desires. 2 monstrous arms emerged and seized him by the throat before he reached the 3rd. Geralt crossed the bank in 3 leaps, drew the silver sword, and cut through the head. The blade did not destroy it. The thing doubled in size. He formed Ard and released as much force as he could. The blast struck the apparition, and the implosion tore at the riverbank and the surrounding willows. The creature released Dandelion, but again it grew. It rose above the water until its open jaws were as broad as barn doors, then reached for them. Geralt found the brass seal buried in the sand. With no tested method left, He clenched it and shouted words Priestess had once taught him as an exorcism. He had never believed they possessed power. The seal burned his hand. The enormous head stopped. Its body shuddered, collapsed into a churning cloud, and fled upstream, leaving the river torn in its wake. Dandelion lived, but the creature had damaged his throat. Blood came from his mouth, and his trained voice had become a broken rasp. Geralt carried him toward Rinde in search of someone capable of treating a magical injury. That search brought him to Yennefer of Vengerberg. She was slender and dressed in black and white. Her hair was black, her eyes violet, and the obsidian star at her throat glittered against velvet. Lilac and gooseberries followed her like a signature. She healed Dandelion, but she also learned about the seal and the Djinn. She wanted its power.
Geralt eventually understood what neither he nor Yennefer had first recognized. Dandelion had never been the Djinn's master. Geralt had held the seal when the creature was freed, and the supposed exorcism had been interpreted as a wish. Another accidental wish had followed. One remained, and that unspoken command prevented Yennefer from fully subduing the Djinn. She summoned it over Rinde and tried to trap it. The air elemental fought her restraints above the town, tearing masonry from buildings and shaking the streets. Geralt was warned that returning to her meant entering a battle he could not win. He went anyway. A portal threw him into the tavern, where Yennefer knelt over a sphere blazing with white light. A pentagram burned upon the floor, and streams of magical fire rose through the roof to the roaring Djinn. The creature was not weakening. It had found her and was opening its own way into the room. The ceiling filled with a vast, shapeless mouth. Long limbs reached through the portal toward Yennefer. Geralt threw her aside and covered her with his body. His sign did nothing against the elemental force. Yennefer opened another portal, and they fell through it while the building convulsed around them. Geralt tried to drag her away from the fight. Yennefer returned. She had committed herself to mastering the Djinn and refused to abandon it, even when her magic weakened and the creature began tearing the town apart. She bound Geralt in burning strands of energy to keep him from interfering, while above them the elemental strained against her failing net. He told her the truth. The wishes belonged to him. Yennefer demanded that he use the final one. She offered every desire the Djinn might fulfill: wealth, power, immortality, fame, even release from the mutations that had made him a witcher. The creature broke through the ceiling while she spoke. Its bonds were failing. Its hunger for vengeance was no longer concealed. Geralt understood what he wanted and made his last wish. The exact words are not given. The result is. The Djinn became free. The house exploded beneath it, throwing bricks, planks, and beams into the rain. The elemental rose from the wreckage, circled above Rinde, tore the spire from the town hall, and vanished into the sky. Geralt and Yennefer survived in a space the collapsing building had somehow left untouched. She had heard what he wished. She understood that he had bound himself to a consequence from which neither of them would easily escape.
The hunt ended without a death, but not without a bond. In Wyzim, the work was clearer only at first glance. King Foltest's proclamation promised 3,000 orens to anyone who could free his daughter from a curse. The princess had been born to Foltest and his sister Adda, had died at birth, and had been placed in a sarcophagus beneath the old palace. For 7 years the crypt remained quiet. Then the child emerged. She had continued growing inside the coffin. The creature was a Striga. For 7 more years it killed within the abandoned palace, and sometimes beyond it, especially under a full moon. It tore guards apart, devoured intruders, and survived every knight, charlatan, and witcher sent against it. Foltest would not permit its deliberate execution. The monster was his daughter, and he believed the spell could be broken. Geralt came to Wyzim in his black coat and worn leather jerkin, his nearly white hair drawing eyes wherever he passed, and the sword hilt rising over his shoulder. His voice was low, unpleasant, and sometimes metallic. The wolf medallion proved his profession. He accepted the commission because he believed the curse might indeed be lifted. He questioned Velerad, the Castellan, and the men who had seen the dead. He examined a miller who had survived an attack. The scars confirmed the reports. The Striga could open its jaws extraordinarily wide. It had 4 long upper fangs, in addition to its other teeth. Its claws were sharper than a wildcat's, though less curved, and it possessed speed and strength out of proportion to its body. The method was known. Someone had to prevent the Striga from returning to its sarcophagus and keep it outside until the 3rd crowing of a cock. If the rule held, dawn would end the curse. The difficulty lay in remaining alive long enough to test it. Foltest demanded that Geralt try to save her. Geralt warned him that he would kill her if the alternative was his own death. The king accepted that condition, though neither man trusted the other completely. Geralt also gave instructions for what should follow a successful transformation. The girl should wear a sapphire inclusion upon a silver chain, and juniper, broom, and aspen should be burned regularly in her chamber. A broken curse could leave dangers behind. On the appointed night, Geralt entered the deserted palace alone. The town had withdrawn from the place over 7 years, leaving a wasteland of ruined buildings and rotting palisades around it. Beyond the lake, the lights of Wyzim shone at a safe distance. Inside, Geralt arranged his equipment upon a dusty table. He opened a metal-bound chest containing dark glass vials packed in dried grass. From a bundle of sheepskin, he took the silver sword, its mirror-bright blade resting in a black scabbard marked with runes. He drank 2 potions, touching the blade after each. One contained veratrum, stramonium, hawthorn, and spurge, together with ingredients unnamed in any human language. Another included banewort, monkshood, and eyebright. The elixirs altered him visibly. His skin became the color of chalk. His pupils widened until they seemed to consume the irises. His hearing sharpened, and the darkness ceased to conceal what moved within it. The same mixtures would have killed an ordinary man. Before midnight, Ostrit came to the palace.
He offered Geralt money to abandon the attempt. He wanted the Striga left alive, so that Foltest's failure and obsession would continue weakening the throne. Beneath the political motive lay another wound. Ostrit had loved Adda, and hatred of her brother had consumed him. He denied knowingly casting the curse, though he remembered words spoken in rage, and no longer seemed certain what those words had done.
Geralt knocked him unconscious, tied him and carried him into the palace. When the lid of the crypt began to move, Geralt tapped Ostrit's bonds. The magnate ran. The Striga followed his footsteps without making a sound. His scream came soon afterward. Geralt waited near the crypt entrance, his coat discarded, his gauntlets pulled tight, and the silver sword ready across his back. The Striga fed upon Ostrit before returning. By Geralt's estimate, 3 hours remained before dawn.
He heard her shuffling through the hall and then saw her. The descriptions had been accurate. A disproportionately large head sat upon a short neck. Tangled reddish hair surrounded it like a dirty halo. Her eyes caught the darkness with an animal shine. She opened her mouth to show rows of pointed teeth, snapped the jaws together, and sprang. Geralt moved aside in a swift turn. The Striga passed him, twisted without losing balance, and struck again before the first attack had properly ended. Her teeth closed a fraction from his chest. He reversed the direction of his movement, confusing her with another turn, and drove the silver studs of his gauntlet into the side of her head. The contact threw her down. She roared until the old palace answered with echoes. Geralt watched her writhe and understood that silver hurt her, as it hurt other creatures created through magic. That meant she could be killed. More importantly, it meant she was not beyond the known nature of her kind. The curse might still be broken. He did not draw the sword. The Striga approached more carefully, drooling between exposed fangs. Geralt circled and changed his pace so she could not judge the moment to leap. As he moved, he unwound a weighted silver chain. When she sprang, the chain crossed the space between them and wrapped around her shoulders, throat, and head. She crashed to the floor, thrashing while the metal burned her. Geralt withdrew and concentrated, ready to act if she freed herself. The chain burst. Silver links struck the stone in a bright rain. The Striga charged through them, blind with rage. Geralt raised his hand and formed art. The force struck her like a hammer. It drove her backward, but did not throw her down. Her hair streamed as though she were walking into a storm, and her claws stretched toward him. One step at a time, she advanced against the sign. Geralt had not expected her to resist so strongly. Holding Ard was exhausting him, and she continued closing the distance. He released it without warning and sprang aside. The sudden absence of resistance sent the Striga forward. She lost balance, slid across the floor, and fell down the steps leading toward the crypt. Geralt ran for the gallery. She emerged almost immediately, moving like a vast black spider. She followed him up the stairs. He waited until she had committed herself, then vaulted the balustrade. The Striga turned and covered the distance in a single extraordinary leap. Geralt's evasions failed to deceive her. Her claws tore lines through his leather tunic, before another strike from his silver-studded gauntlet drove her away.
Anger entered his movements. He kicked her from her feet. Her answering roar loosened plaster from the ceiling. Geralt drew the silver sword. He did not attack with it. He circled, changing the rhythm of the blade so that its motion never matched his steps. The Striga watched the bright edge. When he stopped, she stopped. When he advanced, she retreated. Then he forced something more than steel upon her.
He gathered the hatred, violence, and will required to meet such a creature and directed it outward. For a brief time, he entered the same murderous current from which the Striga had been formed. What he found there was stronger than the fury of basilisks. He turned that force against her, making himself the mirror of the spell's own malice. The Striga recoiled. Feelings she had inflicted upon others now struck her from outside. She whimpered, turned, and fled into the palace corridors.
The effort left Geralt shaking. He did not believe he could repeat it. The elixirs were weakening, and dawn remained distant. He went down into the crypt.
3 sarcophagi stood there. The opened one was broad enough for Adda and her daughter. Geralt drank his bird vial, climbed into the tomb, and lay beside the queen's mummified body. He pulled the lid closed, traced Yrden upon its inner surface, and placed the silver sword across his chest. A small hourglass filled with luminous sand measured the remaining darkness.
The Striga returned. She searched the palace and found the sealed tomb, but Yrden barred her from entering. Geralt lay motionless beside the dead mother, while the potion carried him into a controlled sleep. When he woke, the hourglass had emptied. He opened the sarcophagus by inches, listening. The crypt was silent. Dawn had begun outside. The Striga was gone. A naked girl lay beside the tomb. She was thin and dirty, with small breasts and flaxen red hair reaching almost to her waist. Blood marked the cheekbone where Geralt had struck her. He knelt, lifted her lip, and found normal teeth. Then her eyes opened. The girl slashed his neck before he could withdraw. Her nails cut deeply, and blood struck her face. She reached for his eyes with the other hand. Geralt fell upon her, seized her wrists, and pinned her to the stones. She fought beneath him, weaker than the Striga, but not yet harmless. Her ordinary teeth snapped near his face. Blood poured from the wound in his neck. He had only moments before his strength failed. Geralt struck her face with his forehead and bit into the side of her neck beneath the ear. He held on until the sound coming from her changed. The inhuman howl narrowed into a scream, then broke into the sobbing cry of an injured 14-year-old child. He released her and examined her hands. The nails were dirty, broken, and bloody. They were human. Geralt placed the silver blade against her throat while he made certain. Then he stood, tore cloth from his clothing, and bound his neck. The blood came through every layer. He reached the stairs before his legs failed, sat heavily upon the floor, and lost consciousness. Across the lake, a cock crowed for the 3rd time. The princess survived. Her body was that of a 14-year-old girl, though her mind had not developed with it and required the care given to a much younger child. Foltest paid the promised reward. Geralt lived because men entered the palace soon after dawn and found him before the wound emptied him completely. At the temple of Melatele, Neneke removed the crude stitches placed in Wyzim, opened the injury, and treated it properly. The Striga's claws had narrowly missed the carotid artery and damaged muscles and tendons in his neck. Even with a witch's powers of recovery, healing would take months. Geralt had carried 2 swords into the old palace, silver chains, potions, signs, and all the training Kaer Morhen had carved into him. In the end, he completed the contract with his teeth and nearly died after the monster had already become a girl. That was the truth of hunting monsters. A witcher followed tracks, read wounds, questioned survivors, and separated curses from species, hunger from malice, and human shape from humanity. He killed the Bruxa because she would have killed again. He spared the Sylvan because intelligence and difference were not crimes. He released the Djinn because destroying it was beyond steel, and because another life stood beneath its hands. He broke the Striga's curse because the king had asked for his daughter, not her corpse. There were monsters in ruined palaces and marshes, in dark forests, inside bottles, and behind beautiful faces. There were also men inside monstrous bodies, starving peoples behind thefts, and children beneath fangs. Geralt's task was never merely to draw the correct sword. It was to know when to draw it, when to lower it, and when survival demanded that he strike. The road had not run out of monsters. It had only grown more difficult to tell them apart.